All right, we'll give it another minute or so, make sure everyone gets logged in and audio connected. All right. Well, welcome to our member hour this week, and welcome to the Circular Bioeconomy Systems Member Hour series. Today's talk is about methane power as a sustainable circular solution from ag biowaste, and we have Rob Zemenchik from CNH Industrial with us today. My name is Alicia Modenbach, and I will be your host. As a background, ASABE member hours were started in 2021 as a mechanism for our members to learn, connect, and grow. In a few minutes, we'll get things rolling, but first, some quick session ground rules and speaker introductions. For today's hour, a few general ground rules. So please keep your audio on mute during the presentation. If you have questions, you can place them in the chat during the presentation, and we will also be opening for verbal questions during the question and answer segment at the end. And this meeting will be recorded and available for later viewing on the ASABE website. So today we'll be hearing from Rob Zemenchik. Rob was raised on a family farm in Canada that focused on cattle and hay production before attending the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he earned his PhD in agronomy and his master's in soil science, working on nitrogen management and sustainable cropping systems. He worked for 5 years in coal mining, then spent 14 years with Case IH product marketing in precision farming and crop production products. Most recently, Rob is the Senior Sustainability Manager for CNH Industrial. Rob also has 25 patents in the areas of crop production solutions and digitalization of productive agriculture systems. So Rob, I appreciate you joining us today, and I'm excited to spend the hour learning more about the sustainability of methane power. So please join me in welcoming Rob Zemenchik.
Thank you, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here as a representative of CNH Industrial. I appreciate the invite from Alicia and leadership team at ASABE, and for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today on the topic at hand. Very much is the early days of what we think is the beginning of an exciting trend. And I'm going to be using some graphics that were shared in Toulouse, France, which is near the Airbus factory there recently. So I want to acknowledge my colleagues in that part of the world who put much of this content together. And you will see some pictures and infographics that are branded, but in no way do I want this to come across as any kind of an infomercial. This just happens to be the products we're using to test the concepts and to develop them. So I hope to provide enough technical information as well as some color as to how the customers are perceiving the solutions around the early days here of methane power. So some of the things we've found so far is when you look at a portfolio of products and consider alternative energy, alternative propulsion, getting beyond diesel, there are some breakpoints in the groups of products basically surrounding horsepower demographics. So on the small end of things up to maybe 120 horsepower or so, those seem to be appropriate more for electrical opportunities, maybe some hybrid type solutions. Then as you move into the middle of the horsepower demographic, things open up to maybe some of the methane power and compressed natural gas. And then as you get into the higher horsepower beyond about 270 or so, different solutions become more appropriate than others. And we may have to compress the gas further down with ultra cool systems on board the vehicles to become LNG. So for today's discussion, we're kind of residing in this middle range of CNG, compressed natural gas. without having to use the special coolers and those high pressure cooling systems on board the vehicles. And so customer requirements have to be considered, the regulatory landscape involved, wherever you want to make a product commercially viable, the power to weight ratios, and even the mission profiles of the vehicles, and what's considered the primary use functions, that it's fit for purpose when you ultimately complete the design. So with that background, we took a look at some of the different opportunities of energy out there. And what you find is, all the way from diesel on the left, as you go across the different sizes and groups of solutions that are available, they seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger and take up more space. So on the far end of things, batteries for a high horsepower vehicle begin to exceed the dimensions of the tractors themselves, or would overly dominate them to where it becomes impractical from a visibility standpoint or safety or other considerations. So ethanol and methane solutions kind of reside in the middle and give us an opportunity to deliver an energy source on board the vehicle without overwhelming the design and function and use of the vehicle from an operator standpoint. Okay, so there you see the methane that we're talking about today. And then you have hydrogen, and we looked at that concept previously. We had a hydrogen concept tractor as early as 2011, but it's so big and cumbersome for the profile that we want to fit with the tractor in question today, and then the battery piece. Okay, so just to fast forward a little bit and a glimpse as to what we're going to be talking about today, we've introduced the T6 methane compressed natural gas tractor, primarily in Europe first. This tractor is about 180 horsepower, and you see a few tanks and other features that are added to the tractor to contain the methane, and I'll show you schematic diagrams of that later in the deck. And then we have the T7, which is our LNG tractor. Now, in the past, we would create a concept tractor and talk about it publicly, but I'm excited to say we've gone beyond that already now. We have triple-digit volumes of the T6 tractor now in customers' hands on farms in production. They can buy one from their dealer and go ahead and take that home and use it just like a normal tractor. So we're in the production phase now of this. We have been shipping these tractors since last year, and they're connected. We get the data from them. We see them on the telematics and can monitor the CAN parameters just like a normal tractor. And then the LNG tractor, though, we're still in the, you might say, late concept phase. So we've got some out on trial at the farms, and we're nearing the time when we would make those commercially available. So the T6 is ready to go and up and out there. T7 on deck. Okay. Let's see here. All right, and then just as a glimpse on related products, we have the fully electric vehicles. Now they're a little smaller for the reasons I stated. You don't engage the ground as much with these type of tractors. They're more orchard, vineyard, or specialty applications, mowing, other light loader work. And so we showed this at Las Vegas earlier this year, and it is a tractor that we have planned to commercially release soon as well, but it is fully electric down in that lower horsepower segment. And on the construction side, this is also early days of what we're introducing from fully battery powered electric vehicles with CE in mind. So just to round out the alternative propulsion look and feel from the New Holland brand. You see the rationales then for why we would want to do these kinds of things. We want to reduce our carbon footprint. This plays into the SBTI decarbonization efforts that you may have heard a lot about. So this fits partially into scope 3, our use of sold goods, as well as an avoided emissions category, which is a little bit beyond scope 3, but is now being formalized to where companies would get the decarbonization credit outside of SBTI, but within the avoided emissions category. So the methane tractor does a bit of both. It will actually generate less emissions, which is scope 3, and then from the ability to capture and contain the fugitive methane at the slurry, you could start to generate some avoided emissions credits as well. So for those in the sustainability camp, this is a little bit how we perceive it. And then, of course, the improved air quality measures, which I will detail here momentarily. Okay, let's look at an energy independent on-farm experience, if you will, and some of the KPIs and metrics that we've learned as we've deployed these tractors. All right, so a flow chart of the schematics involved sort of tell us that you can take all of these organic inputs, mainly manure, but it could be crop waste, food waste, any organic source can be pooled into this digester represented by the blue disc there in the middle. And it's anaerobically digested, okay? And the flows coming out are quite interesting. There's opportunity for energy cogeneration. And then as the methane is contained, you have to upgrade it or filter it, if you will. The raw gas is about 60% methane, but there's a lot of hydrogen sulfide and water vapor and other things you have to take out before you have automotive grade methane that can be burned in an ICE or internal combustion engine. And so that's what the process requires. And under research conditions, or traditionally, we would see, you know, large towers or harvestor type systems, which were a little spendy. And so commercial viability is one of the hurdles that has to be solved to make this viable on farm. And I'll get into a little bit more of that here shortly. But after you upgrade and filter the gas, then you have to compress it down to have enough range, if you will, inside the tractor to make it practical. I can't run out of fuel in 20 minutes. A farmer would not accept that when he can go a whole day today on a tank of diesel fuel. So we have to think about first upgrading it and then compressing it. Okay, and then it's once we've done that process, we are ready to put it into fueling of vehicles. And we affectionately say, if successful at this effort, we're kind of going beyond horsepower, a little bit towards cow power. And I jokingly say that, but we've actually run the metrics and looked at this with herds of approximately 110 to 120 cows, which is a reasonably, you know, by some standards, a small farm, but it's one that we can at least understand quite easily. And each cow seems to produce in our models about 185 kilograms of automotive grade methane per year. And that represents about 50 megajoules of energy per kilogram. So that's the opportunity with methane. It's one of the very few systems that is a waste product, but at the same time can be a tremendous energy product. And this doesn't require the confiscation of food sources or substitution for what otherwise might have produced food for people's tables. It's a waste product. And worse yet, methane is tremendously potent at capturing the sun's energy. About 80 times more potent even than CO2. So this is a double win. We get to take a waste product that is harmful for the environment and turn it into an energy source. Okay, Benjamin is a partner that's helping us get there from here. And they're a UK-based company, a startup with about 40 employees. Long story real short, they wanted to solve the problem of the barriers to entry into this. And so they've developed a lagoon system that's affordable and practical and scalable. And we have taken an investment position in them to help them along the way. Some of the things that they've identified that are worth reminding us all of are shown at the top in the infographics. I mentioned the fourth one to the right, that the approximate ratio in let's just say carbon lethality, if you will, of methane versus CO2 is about an 80-fold increase. That global warming potential, even 20 years later after generation, we would say It has a GWP rating of 20. And so methane is very, very potent. And it accounts for a huge portion of the gases that agriculture generates that contribute to global climate change. Some estimates are in excess of 30%. So we need to solve this problem if we're going to continue to use the confinement systems and energy rich, you might say, production systems that we've grown accustomed to. And time is of the essence. So the 2030 deadline was put on and agreed to by many countries, the Paris Climate Accord. So we're sort of working under that paradigm to solve this problem sooner than later. Okay, so what's different about the Benjamin approach than maybe other approaches? As they look at this circular system, beginning with grass, okay, photosynthesis is where it all starts. The cow eats it. Then we generate manure, and for at least the Northern Hemisphere, for a time, the animals are seasonally confined and we generate this manure, and we have the opportunity to contain it and collect it, gather it, and harness that power and turn it into, with the processing I mentioned, into a biomethane fuel source. The system has some great benefits though. I've listed them in red. It's on site. So this is not like Mobile Shell, Exxon, Chevron, or BP, where you have to go to, Oklahoma or Louisiana or somewhere, or Texas, to get the fuel. It's produced on the farm. Seems obvious, but it's local. It's generated near the users who will benefit from it. So it's not a vertically integrated major oil company. This is on-site, internal, on-farm. It can be rapidly refined and liquefied. So what we have seen is about every 5 days or so, the raw methane capacity of the system is full. Then we convert it and generate the automotive grade methane. It's affordable, approximately a 3-year payback or less by the farmer who would invest in this system. Benjamin invests in part of it. CNH has part of the investment. So all the stakeholders come to the table, and the systems that we have sold so far seem to be able to be paid back in short order. And most growers, when they see an ROI less than 5 years, they're listening, especially if it solves a problem. It's flexible though. You don't have to put this fuel into a tractor. It can be bottled up and sold to school districts, municipalities, contractors, others who have methane powered vehicles. So this is a great opportunity then to diversify the revenue of the farm if there's excess capacity of methane. Maybe only 1 or 2 tractors get used for methane, and the rest of the surplus methane is sold, bottled, sold by services that are emerging. And you see the truck there in this cycle. What we have found is third parties begin to contract with these growers, take the methane, and then commercially make it available to others. This system does not rely on being plugged into the grid to power it. It's internally powered because you can use the methane within the system to power the compressors and power the filtration itself. You don't have to be on the grid and draw power from the Commonwealth Edison or anybody else to make it work. This is another benefit of this circular system, is not being dependent on the grid. You can hook it all up, so you can have it in the palm of your hand and monitor it 24/7, 365 with the typical apps and connectivity. So that's nice as well. And this helps the farmer and even the local community be resilient to extreme fluctuations in energy prices, which we saw in the last 2 years in particular in Europe and Eastern Europe due to the conflict in Ukraine. So there's a lot of pluses here to take a hard look at this. Okay, so here's what they do. You have a lagoon. This can usually be 10 meters square or 25 meters square, something along that order. And a plastic tarp is put over it, and this collects the dirty biogas as it's anaerobically emitted from the slurry, and it's captured in the first layer. Then there is this gas filtration system. on the side of this, where you take out the impurities that I mentioned, the so-called dirty biogas. Then it is stored in an upper layer of the same canopy. This green tent is sort of two layers. First layer is dirty. Second layer is a storage tank, if you will, a fabric tank where the clean gas is stored. It's like a sandwich you're building, dirty, then clean. Okay. Then you have this opportunity, I guess, to build these packs for export. As I mentioned, the trucks can come and get this purified automotive grade methane that formerly was just lost to the environment and now can be contained and commercially made available. Okay, and it can be help build out infrastructure and the broader use of the fuel source. Okay, so here's what it kind of looks like a little bit closer up. You see the canopy, if you will. It has a 20-year life, so it's not forever, but has a life that's well beyond the payback period that I mentioned previously of that approximately 3 years. All right, it's a two-piece solution. They even found they get rainwater benefits from it in collection because it acts like a watershed. It basically zips together, and it's pretty easy to install. It takes a few men or people to put it together, and it's easy to retract for getting the solids out for fertilizer replacement value. And it's easy to replace if damaged. So they've built this rather low cost solution that seems to reduce those barriers to entry. You don't need these massive bolt together, towers that we're used to seeing that were in the past in our silage systems. So this is now a little bit more of the kind of the bagged agriculture approach, if you will. Okay, and we won't read through all of this, but on the left, you have sort of the limits of the conventional systems. Some of them have to do with getting the purification and being dependent on the grid and so forth. And then what the folks at Benjamin have developed is this ability to purify on site, to do it, without being on the grid, and to have it truckable and usable even beyond the farm gate. Okay, and the farmers, what's in their mind as they contemplate using a system like this? As we consider it, the regulatory landscape is getting more cumbersome. Let's be honest. The days of just, throwing the manure out on the landscape at 10 tons to the acre are probably numbered, both from a phosphorus and nitrogen runoff standpoint and accelerated eutrophication. Those were all the things we used to talk about, but even from an emissions and carbon capture, decarbonization standpoint, this is no doubt going to meet with increasing regulatory limits and challenges worldwide. And we are already seeing this in the UK, and it's picking up momentum elsewhere. I don't mean to sound alarmist, but I think if we're honest, that's probably the trend we're seeing. The increasing costs of compliance to meet that regulatory landscape are certainly real, and farmers, even in their purchase considerations going forward, are having to factor that in more and more as to how are we going to handle this? What are we going to do? Whether it's pork, poultry, or dairy. I'm not exclusively focusing on cattle today. This has applications to other animal systems as well. Okay, and then I guess the key point is this flexibility on the right-hand side of the infographic here, that we can take this system and the farmer is not forced to put it in a tractor. That's certainly an option, but they have different routes and fates of the fuel generated and the energy captured to accommodate their business system, their local regulations. There are no two farms the same, it seems. So having an adaptable and flexible system is worthwhile and has its merits. Okay, and what are some of the benefits that they can be realized? There's a list of them here. The payback there mentioned is 4 to 6. We're a little more optimistic with that, but depending on the market, right? So let's be conservative. Some areas will qualify for subsidies, some won't. It's not totally dependent on that. that may be a factor. There's certainly the environmental benefits. I like the fact that the digestate left over from this process can be used to supplement phosphorus and potash inputs. We've tried to capture the bulk of the nitrogen, of course, but that can be a fertilizer source that can replace a lot of the synthetic fertilizer, if you will. And that has a benefit too, because of the nitrous oxide and denitrification losses often associated with that. Odor and anti-quality factors associated with raw manure disposal and broadcast using, box spreaders or side slingers, those kinds of things. And so there's environmental benefits that are tremendous here. And the energy independence piece, not being subject to the vagaries of the markets when it comes to gas pricing, that's a benefit as well for both farms and for the public. Okay, so in our on-farm trials, what have we learned? We have seen, these are some KPIs, called out some of the key ones in red in the upper right. So we take this source from the cows, this raw methane, if you will, and we have found we can capture and convert about at an 89% efficiency the raw methane into that 185 kilograms per year per cow that I mentioned. If you look at a 120 cow herd, that's approximately 20 metric tons of methane per year. So 20 metric tons, this would power approximately 2 T6 180 tractors, 180 horsepower tractors, for about 700 to 800 hours each, depending on how they're used. So that's 120 cows. If you had 1,200 cows, you're now talking 20 tractors, and you can do the scaling math there. Or it can be sold off, as I mentioned. And the 545 is the tons per year that's avoided by such a herd. Very interesting. We now can look at this, and this is 11,000 tons over a 20-year period. And you start to look at this in terms of your SBTI objectives and your avoided emissions goals. And I've started to do this, and the methane captured and saved and converted is significant against all the diesel emissions you have to consider. So this is not just noise. This is a meaningful stack on the bar chart. So we are taking a hard look at this in our plans, and we think it's an opportunity here, both in scope 3 and the avoided emissions category. Some of the other benefits are listed here on the left that are interesting. And so even the fuel that's saved, that's a substitute for diesel, comes into play, and the electricity generated and so forth. So lot of benefits here, from methane capture, power generation, fertilizer substitutes, fuel savings, and so forth. Okay, in terms of investment, the farmer certainly has some CapEx considerations to make this successful. We've got to, put in a lagoon if there isn't one already. We have to build an infrastructure that allows us to pack and bottle these if that's a route that's going to be taken. A filling station to charge the tractor. I mean, I'll show you some pictures of that here momentarily. A generation, if that's required, and certainly it will, because I mentioned you have to take a little bit of the methane to create enough power to run the compressors and so forth. Benjamin itself comes to the table, and they have what they refer to as a biocycle. And this is this truck service that can gather the bottles, if that's the way the business model is set up, and take those packs to other users of methane. And then the generators as well, they participate in that. And then you need a dealer network to service and support this. So we have to train our dealers. How are you going to support a methane tractor and service that, and a methane power generation system, and or contractors who will be willing to fill that need? So there are those technical requirements as well. And then franchisees that may indeed look at providing delivery services and equipment maintenance contracts. Okay, So it's up and running. It seems to work. The parties involved are benefiting from this. And so commercial viability, I would say, is encouraging from what we've seen so far. Now, not everybody has 150 cows. You might have a community with several farms that big, so they can be grouped together. Either the manure can be hauled, or if the lagoons are still separate, and on each of those farms, this truck service could make a route and service them, much like a dairy truck used to go around in the old days. Now a methane truck could take its place, and the fugitive methane then gathered and sold at scale and used, and what we found is one of these contractors with a service truck usually ends up servicing about 900 cows or so by the time he makes his routes and rounds and handles all the packaging and bottling. So it can pull together several farms so that they can get the economies of scale seen by bigger operations. Okay, just a quick shot here of some of the costs involved. So a farmer doesn't need $1 million to get into this. For approximately the price of a mid-sized tractor, you can be in the game. You notice the lagoon cover at 83,000. These are British pounds, mind you. So multiply by about 1.2, depending on the day. And you see there, it's 6 figures, but not out of reach for most operations, especially if there's financing available. And there you see the benefits and the net returns and the ROI somewhere around that 3-year mark at the bottom, given these costs. Okay, so what are some of the summary points to be made? We have a low cost implementation and running program versus traditional approaches to the problem. We have a decentralized way to manage and gather the methane once it's purified, generated, and sourced. We also have a scalable technology that works for both smaller farms and bigger farms. There's no need to export it. You're not dependent on the grid. You can use it internally within the operation or opt to sell it, as I mentioned. It has on-site liquefaction, so we actually produce the product right next to the slurry pit. We don't have to, send it off to Cushing, Oklahoma, or anywhere else to get this job done. It's on farm, which is a positive for most growers. It's zero waste, so it's truly circular. We're not using a food source to create energy, as ethanol often does. About 32% of the US corn crop goes down the throats of tanks of cars, and I've often wondered how long that can go. It has its issues, especially in an inflationary environment. So this is another consideration. And it's truly a circular economy from what was a waste product and also one that had an environmental problem. And we have end-to-end service delivery capabilities and contractors that appear to be willing to step up and participate in this solution. Okay, so moving on, just a few visuals to show you what this kind of looks like on farm. You might say, what's that great big thing on front of that tractor? That's called an extender. So without that tank, we have methane canisters, if you will, built in elsewhere on the design, but this doubles the capacity from about a 2-hour usage to over 4. So we get let's just call it half a day. We get half a day's use of methane on a tractor this size with this system. So if you were going to use the tractor for 8 hours, you'd need to fill up midday. Okay, so it's simple because we didn't need a whole new form factor. We're using an existing T6 tractor, same axles, same cab, same tires, same transmissions. This was an easy conversion for us. And so we didn't have to go through a lot of radical training for operators. It's pretty simple for them to plug in and fill their methane tanks and just treat the tractor like normal. So that's a benefit as well from an OEM's consideration and standpoint. It's a simpler system. And so here you see on the left versus the right, the left is the kind of the traditional tractor factors, and on the right hand side you see the comparisons. And so quite similar to what we're used to operating and seeing on the farm. So you don't have to go out and change all your implements and all the rest of it. It drops into an existing production system. So again, that commercial viability piece seems to be attractive, the way that methane helps us get there. Okay, our engine suppliers have taken a hard look at what they need to do to make this work, to combust the methane. And so they didn't need to make a lot of radical changes to the engine. It's a common rail injection system. Yes, there's pressures involved and maybe some slight differences in what the bars or kPa, kilopascals of pressure that are involved, but it's still an ICE engine. So it wasn't a difficult transition from where we were to what we have today. And so here you see the traditional look at a diesel, whether it's whether we're using DEF or diesel particulate filters or the other things that help us be Tier 4B or Tier 5 compliant. It's quite, well, it's a little complicated in some of this routing and some of the tools that make this system work. And I'm going to show you now a comparison of this diesel system versus the methane system. Pretty straightforward. We don't need diesel particulate filters because there is none. So that's a savings farmers like. Those filters are several $1,000s. So there's some benefits to this system in its simplicity. So they like it and it meets stage 5 compliance. So it's future-proofed a little bit. So we're encouraged that way too, that this isn't here today, gone tomorrow. It's going to stick in the solution and allows us a long ramp up period for helping growers get to where they need to be in terms of compliance. So we don't have an obsolescence risk here. And that's, I think, compelling. Okay, and you can fill this gas up pretty much anywhere where there's a methane filling station. As this adoption of methane gets more widespread, when you see the word autonomy there, that doesn't mean driverless, that means independent or standalone, that the product can work by and get the job done without a high dependence on other things happening. Okay, here's the schematics I promised I would show you from earlier. So the yellow are the methane tanks on the powertrain. So on the left, you see where the tanks are mounted. This is the right-hand side view. So we've got a 14-liter tank and a 29-liter set of tanks. So that's 2 horizontal tanks. And then the extender, the optional 3 90-liter canisters. So you see those round cylindrical tubes. Those are actually the pressure methane tanks. That's what you're filling up. So what we saw in the front of the tractor was a skirt or a casing around it. But inside is those yellow tanks. And they're protected. They've got some reinforced bars there. And so it's up to code, up to standard. You have to build this accident proof, collision proofs, in case somebody goes in the ditch or does it, heaven forbid, an accident occurs. You've got to have those protected. And so you see the total capacity, we can take up to about that 4-hour range using these tank systems that are now mounted on the tractor. Okay, so without the range extender, just doing traditional farm work, loader work, we get about, it says there 1 hour, 45 minutes. So almost 2 hours, but that's heavy duty. If I were doing light duty work, maybe 3.5 hours with this tractor. So it depends on the mission profile of the duty cycle of the tractor. So somewhere between 1 hour and 45 minutes and 3.5 hours, depending on application without the extender. We start adding the extender, now we can go, 4 hours or more with full load, whether like tillage or something like that's ground engaging, and up to 8 hours where we're doing lighter applications, maybe spraying or something along those lines. So from that standpoint, this seems again to be viable. Okay, and then as public station build out occurs, the tractors or any other vehicle for that matter, a school bus or a roadside mower or anything, could begin to participate at these filling stations, whether it be at the farm A farmer may create this, or it could be anywhere else. So delivery systems seem rather simple. They're not elaborate to make this happen. And just nearing the end here, you can create these bottle type systems where on the farm, the canisters could be filled, stored, and just like when you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and pick up your propane bottles for your gas grill, you could do the same for methane and your vehicles. So, or have it delivered to you from a contractual point of view. So very kind of similar to these, the cages you see at the big box stores. So this is another approach to how to benefit from the available fuel. All right, so and these small scale filling stations can also be created, and you see some of the suppliers who've jumped in and started to create these. And just like a traditional gas station, because now you have a methane one. And in rural communities, this can be a big plus. And again, independent from the grid. So to put one of these in a community, I don't have to run, you know, phase 3 power lines and 440 kV lines to create something like this. It can be on site, right there on the farm, which is nice. In my area where I come from, a power pole today with that kind of power would be $10,000 a pole. So think about that. This seems rather easy to facilitate. Okay, and then again, small packs for smaller trucks and light utility vehicles are certainly possible. And then you see some remote capabilities with trailers and other things. This can take all different shapes, forms, and sizes. And then finally, on more larger scale types, if you were to deliver this to a factory or some other larger facility, can certainly be done with larger tanks and larger vehicles. So that's all I had today. I hope that wasn't too quick of a walk through the process, orient you to maybe at least what we have found. And I hope I can answer any questions that anyone might have.
Great, thank you for that presentation. We do have quite a few questions that came in during that time. Just a reminder that the full presentation will be posted on ASABE's YouTube channel after we are done here today. First question is the biomethane produced able to be sold to the natural gas distribution network?
Always subject to, and that's a good question. The market participants in this are diverse. This could include the group you mentioned, but it's going to be subject to each country's and each region within each country's gas service providers. So this could be, in the Midwest US, we're talking about, I don't know who would do this. This would be FS as a co-op, if they were set up to participate in this, they could certainly ramp up and get the trucks and create the stations and take this off the farmer's hands. Certainly could. Those type of arrangements are the free market will fill that need and gap, an opportunity. It's not something we're driving, but I guess that opportunity is definitely there.
Okay. The next question, the manure stream is normally a fertilizer. What is the impact to the nutrients content for the next crop when the methane is extracted from the manure stream?
Very good question. So if we think of the dried, semi-dried digestate that comes out of this system, largely the nitrogen's been removed. Okay, so it still has a carbon residue. It's a solid, right? So when we put it on a crop, we'll get the potash and the phosphorus and any trace micronutrient benefits from that. But just like corn stover, we're probably going to have to watch for microbial immobilization of field available nitrate. And just like we do today, we see a little potential for a dip in N availability temporarily until that is released as the soil microbial biomass converts over. So I would suspect agronomists would have to pay attention to that if large amounts of this substrate were applied to non-leguminous crops like corn or wheat or sorghum.
What is the standard, questions, what is the standard of methane for fueling such as methane purity or other requirement? And second part, what is the biggest bottleneck upgrading a dirty biogas?
I'll take the second question first. The biggest one, I think, is the hydrogen sulfide. We've looked at this. We've got the breakout of what every day we sample the gas just to look at it. And hydrogen sulfide's a little messy. Okay, it's H2S. It's very acidic. But what they use is charcoal filters in like drums, and the charcoal filtration is able to take out that H2S gas. I don't know off the top of my head how long a barrel of this lasts, but I suspect that's part of one of the inputs into the system is this charcoal filtration. And then what do you do with it after? I got to ask the guys about that. I don't know if is this going to a landfill? I don't know. Or is there a way to handle that piece, sustainably? But that warrants further investigation. But let's point everyone to charcoal filtration as the way to move the H2S gas. And then the water vapor is a little bit more of an easier one. It's just like dehumidification, right? And we can use pressure treatments and other things to get the water vapor out. Those are the main two. Now, also remember, underneath that dirty canopy, there's CO2 there. And I said, 55 to 60% of it is methane. That's true. What's the other 40% in addition to H2S? H2S is on the order of parts per million, right? Maybe on the low end, 50 to 100, on the high end, 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million H2S. So it's not the dominant secondary gas, it's CO2. So what happens? Do we have a system that's throwing off CO2? That's not good. And so, but remember, it was already being lost to the environment anyway. That CO2 was long gone, long before these slurry systems and biodigesters showed up. So we have excuse me, we have still opportunities to capture that CO2 rather than just have it released. So there's opportunities here yet for further enhancement to the system. As for standards and international standards, I don't think we have one set of standards yet. In the UK, they seem to be further ahead of where everybody else is. And I think in the deck, there's an acronym there, the ISS standard, international something. There are standards emerging is the point. And I would turn to the UK as one of the early adopters and early trendsetters of what the standards need to be, both in terms of the methane that's handled in this solution and what emissions occur from it. And just like a factory, it's going to have its own emissions footprint. And then when we turn the lights on and heat a building in Fargo, North Dakota to build Steiger four-wheel drive tractors, we have a footprint of emissions there. And we account for that now in our SBTI profile. And it conceivably is that we'll have to do that too on these systems. They will have their own, Benjamin will have to account for this. I don't know that all the farmers with their digital apps, they'll be able to account for this, but I believe in the aggregate, we'll need to do that as well.
Got an opportunity there, it looks like.
Yes.
Are you collecting your methane slowly from manure slurry ponds?
I think the 5-day cycle is what I've been hearing from the on-farm trials, that there's enough from 130, 120 cows that fills up this 10 meter by 10 meter. So every 5 days, we sort of have to cycle this through. If we just let it fill up and then we're not optimized. We're letting the anaerobic digestion occur. And there must be a pressure relief in here somewhere. We would lose that methane if we didn't have the conversion ongoing as a process. And animals are confined for about 7.5 months is what we've seen on average in northern latitudes, some more, some less. But what do you do in the off months? I think that's the opportunity to unzip the canopy, get your digestate out, clean it all up, and get ready for the next 7.5 month cycle.
Are maintenance requirements similar for tractors using methane versus diesel?
Good question. So, well, I noted there that there were actually some benefits compared to diesel from diesel particulate filters and DEF fluid and DEF systems. So we've actually removed some of the complexity of the current diesel tractors that are on the market. So from that standpoint, it's a little less. I would suspect those tanks, and anytime you're dealing with pressure regulators and valves, they need to be inspected regularly, and we need to train our dealers how to do that. So probably a regular system check and pressure check on all those valves, be sure all the seals are working right, any hose routing the integrity is there, that we haven't got, things that are anywhere leaking, and how we do that. There could be various techniques. I think it's like any pressure system. They've got meters that can detect gas when carbon monoxide testing, you've got gauges that detect that. We could do the same with these tractors, but those tools are, I guess, becoming increasingly available, as well as the techniques we would use to do it. But certainly that would be a requirement. We can't just turn these tractors loose and turn a blind eye to them.
This question came in before you got to it, because I know the answer was on one of your slides, but in case you want to add anything to it, what is the refill time for a tractor?
Yeah, I think we covered that, but it's important question because here in California where I am, they're looking at we've got huge dairies next to orchard vineyards, and they do a lot of mowing in between the trees and regular integrated pest management passes. And today, that's a lot of horsepower. I mean, they go 10, 11 times a year through an orchard. And while it's not ground engaging, it's certainly a lot of hours put on the tractors. And so the mission profile would be, in that example, non-ground engaging. So not a big demand per hour, but a lot of hours over the season. Whereas if I were in Iowa, maintaining a cornfield, I might have fall tillage or other things to consider that would use a lot more per hour. And as you saw in the slides, we see a range that almost doubles the methane. So there's the methane, the range of the tractor is twice as good in those lighter duty non-ground engaging applications than it would be had we were chiseling the ground or anything like that. And I used the 4 versus 8 hours, 8 for light duty with the extender, 4 for lower duty or without the extender, or lower duty with the extender.
All right. It's my understanding that the methane from dairy cows is the result of gassing of the cows is the major culprit of global warming. If methane can come both manure ponds and cows gassing, what percentage of methane extracted from manure pond compares to the whole available methane from dairy?
This is a great question. You bring up a couple of great factors and considerations. This is an animal nutrition issue as well as genetic. And, traditionally 40% of a lactating dairy cow's ruminant ration would be ground corn or high energy feedstuffs supplemented with, cottonseed and roasted soybeans and other things like that. And then high value, relative feed value alfalfa or other protein-based forages. So are we creating a bit of our own mess with that kind of a ration? Probably could be argued. It certainly hasn't helped. But here we are. Then the genetic piece, have we bred and optimized these herds for methane? I don't think so. We're using the current herd base. So we don't know, is a Guernsey cow better than a Holstein or an Ayrshire? I have no idea. Or, where in the lactation cycle is one cow any better than another? Or even, her methane production. So we have some initial KPIs, that 185 kilograms per cow. I think that's the average cow fed with current industry nutritional practices. That's what we're seeing. But a lot of opportunity there to do further research and investigate how we can improve that, maybe from a nutritional standpoint and a genetic standpoint. I think there was one other aspect to the question that I haven't addressed yet.
What percentage of methane extracted from manure pond compares to the whole available methane from dairy?
Oh, yeah, I said 89% we're seeing. So if I have raw methane that we've just, that's generated from the raw sewage that we put into the lagoon, we can get about 89% of the methane back from that event. Now, some could escape, in the barn before it's pushed in, I suppose, yes. But if we're efficient at that and pretty, Johnny on the spot with our loaders and push blades, get it into the lagoon, or with automated auger systems and chain systems, we get that to happen quickly and regularly in the barn, we can look at about 89% is what we're seeing.
Well, this example, so this is another question that came in. So this example was dairy. How does it apply to swine or poultry?
To be determined, but we see no limitation. Those are, especially the hog waste, plenty of water there, barn washing systems and so forth. Great opportunity. I think the drier the litter, maybe the more we might have to prepare it a little bit more with water to create an effluent that is optimized for that anaerobic digestion. So, I've worked in chicken barns and you have to often scoop it out dry, and that may not lend itself right away to anaerobic digestion. So somewhere along the lines, there's a moisture optimal window, maybe even temperature. And so we have to look at those factors for the other manure stuffs that are mentioned there. And you can go further down the line. What about beef cattle in a feedlot? What about other systems? We're probably going to have to do some modification of those inputs to some degree versus the idealized slurry entry point that I've kind of laid out here as our case study example today.
All right, we've got quite a few more questions that have come in the chat. I see a hand raised. I know we're also coming up at the top of the hour. Rob, do you have a couple extra minutes to stick around to answer questions?
Yes, I do. Yes,
okay.
I'm available yet.
Okay, well, I do want to thank those of you who are here today in case you have to jump off this call. We'll get through as many more of these questions as we can in the time that we have. Norman Scott, I see your hand raised. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah,
hi, Norman,
good.
I can hear you fine.
Yeah, great. I really enjoyed the presentation very much. Cornell is for many years been involved in anaerobic digestion studies. And what you effectively showed was a less expensive system that was at least very early in development at Cornell. We used to call essentially a covered lagoon, as you were showing, which was the least cost compared to those that you mentioned in Europe. But I do have to say, having also looked at the idea of converting the gas into other uses other than electricity, and as you have suggested, comes with which creates very great skepticism on my part that over the years, even just the digester itself was a very great concern for size of cow dairy that you mentioned, like 100 to 150. So I can't help, I have to say, be very skeptical in terms of the economics. And I wonder to what extent, particularly when you start cleaning up the gas on a small farm of the size you've indicated. Now, cooperative initiatives or even a gas pipeline have been talked about connecting many farms. But what I'm getting at is that doing that cleanup, and you described it correctly in terms of its composition and the requirement that would be needed, as a very expensive one. And also to mention two quick things in that last comment, two areas that are being worked on in many places on changing the effect of methane production, possibly from the ruminant, is the use of seaweed in quite a few studies, and also biochar and so forth. And another thing to be concerned about that would be a challenge is a huge amount of initiative and research by EDF in particular on gas, methane emission from our natural gas system. So knowing on a farm and all the issues that you described, the challenge with reducing leakage and maintaining no leaks will be one as well. So anyway, I like it a great deal. It's terrific. I'm hugely skeptical of it being, unless maybe your economics is based on very high prices for fuels in Europe, that might change the equation. But for the US, this seems to me exceedingly unlikely from an economic perspective. Sorry to
Thank
be
you.
so lengthy.
No, thanks, Norman. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. That's very valuable for us. Yeah, no doubt. The economics have to stand on their own 2 feet. We can't expect to have our hands in the public pockets to make this work. Europe traditionally has been more subsidized than perhaps the free markets in the US. So you raise a fair point. We got to take a hard look at that, so that this can be scaled globally and where the barriers are, no doubt. And those alternative inputs like the seaweed and the biochar, yeah, those tools need to be looked at as well. So thank you for identifying that. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And look, I'd like to hear more about your studies and experiences someday.
Great, thank you. Going back to the chat, in the installations you have so far, about what percentage of manure is being used compared to biomass in the methane generation?
Can you repeat the question, Alicia? I just want to be sure I understand that.
In the installations you have so far, about what percentage of manure is being used compared to biomass in the methane generation?
Oh, I see what you're saying. The on-farm, excuse me, lagoon systems that we have used so far, I believe almost the entire manure generated during the confinement period is put into the system. So yeah, for the 4.5 months that the animals are not in confinement, pretty hard to gather that up and make that happen. But let's just say 7.5 out of 12, that would be about the percent of the annual manure generation, since they lactate year round. And this is not a seasonal lactating herd or an MIG type of management intensive grazing approach or anything like that. So let's go with that as an estimate.
Okay. All right, one of our attendees today said that their dad converted a Fiat tractor to run with biogas from a biogas plant he designed in 1980.
Huh.
I believe, yeah, I believe the RNG can play a major role for transportation and the environment. So it was just a comment, but I thought that was a neat one to throw in there.
Wow, that on-farm innovation, you can never discount that.
At the beginning of your presentation, you showed that CNG is best suited for the mid horsepower range. How do you see this technology fitting into larger operations with several high horsepower tractors?
Yeah, very good question. Okay, so 500 horsepower 4-wheel drive tractors and Class 8 combines and the like, probably not going to be anytime soon that we will see methane or LNG, even electric. The best thing we can do is look at hybrids, where things like air conditioning systems and electronics and it might be supplemented or replaced by batteries and hybrids and maybe some of these alt fuel solutions. Where I would say there might be one exception to that is sugarcane, where in Latin America and in the southeastern United States, they are looking at biogas and ethanol products from the sugarcane mills to power future harvesters entirely in lieu of diesel. They just have such an opportunity, looking hard at this, no doubt in Brazil and elsewhere. So stay tuned, probably more news in that area. But for the traditional Midwest type that we're familiar with, yeah, it's just so that capacity dimension problem, we would end up with locomotives going down the field to plant corn, and it's just not going to fly. But the supplemental piece, maybe, a chopper on the back of a combine or something, we can look at maybe 20 to 30% of the power potentially being replaced by an alt system of some kind, whether it's electric or biogas of some kind.
Okay. Does the digester need to be charged with bacteria or something similar?
So far, we have not seen a role for inoculants. I don't know what Norman saw, but there seems to be enough normal flora to kind of that system to be up and running itself. Norman, you care to comment from Cornell?
Yeah, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you typically you can develop with the existing bacteria,
There you
but
go.
sometimes you want to get things started a little quicker, and so there is an effort to implant some bacteria from another digester to get started.
Mhm.
Okay, good to know.
What percentage of total amount of methane produced by a dairy cow goes into manure, and what percentage goes into gasification?
Oh, we have that. We have that. So the ratio between manure and the so-called belching and emissions from the animal naturally, I'm going by memory here, but according to the FAO, I believe about 30% of the ruminant emissions leave the cow through the belching and flatulence, and the rest is in the manure, 70% or so. So approximately those numbers. So we don't, in this system, we have not captured all of the animals' emissions. You know, there's 30% still lost out the north and south end, but that's it.
All right, one final question here. So every rural area has school buses with a duty cycle more matched to low energy quantities on board. Has that use been considered?
It's one of the ones we've talked about. Yes, I don't have a slide to show pictures of that yet, but we think municipal and those fleet type applications lend itself to this application very well. You have the repetitive and nature of many vehicles doing the same thing the same way, and one filling station could take care of a fleet like that kind of is housed in one place at night. Yeah, it seems like a logical entry point for this type of application.
Yeah, all right. Well, great. Thank you for your presentation today. It was a very interesting topic, and thank you for staying a few extra minutes with us. There was a lot of discussion there at the end, so I think
yeah, you're a great group, and thank you for the engaged conversation. I really appreciate it and wish everybody the best.
All right, so I want to thank you all again for your participation today, and a special thanks to our speaker, Rob Zemenchik, from my co-moderator and ASABE Director of Membership, Sarah Rodriguez, as well as several others that helped make this member hour a reality. We have one final seminar in this series. It's in about 2 weeks on June 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern. This webinar will focus on brain, body, and plant nutrition and wellness, and we'll close out this series on circular bioeconomy systems. Charlie Messina from the University of Florida will be discussing topics related to the human and environmental health crisis in the United States. The sessions in this series will be available on YouTube via the ASABE CBS website. If you're further interested in connecting with others and growing the circular bioeconomy systems movement, we hope that you will join us at the CBS Day event held in Omaha, Nebraska on July 9th. You can find more details on ASABE's meeting registration page. Again, thank you for your time and your participation today, and we look forward to hosting you again in future ASABE events.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you.